Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to the Valentine's Views podcast for Monday, June 12th. I'm your host, Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're listening across the Big Blue View radio network, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, your New York Giants will begin their mandatory minicamp on Tuesday. Big Blue View will be in attendance Tuesday and Wednesday to watch both of those practices and to talk to coaches, talk to players, learn as much as we can about your New York Giants before they break for the summer until training camp starts late in July. So let's talk a little bit about the mandatory minicamp and what to expect. First and foremost, let's talk about running back Saquon Barkley. You can't expect Saquon to be in attendance on Tuesday and Wednesday. As I record this, it's Saturday, so we'll see what happens between now and then. But unless Barkley has a change of heart and decides to sign his franchise tag, or somehow the Giants and Barkley's representatives reach a contract agreement before minicamp starts, I would not expect Barkley to be in attendance. I was looking at the rules for minicamp attendance, and former agent Joel Corey, a guy who was a guest on our show here a couple of weeks ago, recently wrote an article on CBS Sports, and Corey indicated that players who have been placed under the franchise or transition tag and have not signed it cannot be fined if they choose not to attend the mandatory minicamp. They can't be fined simply because they don't have a contract, which means they are not required to provide services. So call it a holdout if you want. If Saquon doesn't show up, call it whatever you want. I'm not expecting Barkley to be there. Withholding services is really the last bit of leverage, or only bit of leverage, that Saquon has at this point in his negotiations with the Giants for a long-term deal. This is really the beginning of the stretch run for Barkley and the Giants in terms of agreeing to a long-term contract if they're able to get that done. The deadline for that is July 17. So once we get through the mandatory minicamp, there'll be about a month left. And you can expect, I would think, that as that deadline gets closer and closer, we'll hear more and more about back and forth between Barkley and the Giants. And, hopefully they'll get a long-term deal done, but we'll have to see about that. At this point, I wouldn't be shocked if Saquon ends up having to sign the franchise tag and play the 2023 season on that 1 year, $10.091 million deal. We keep hearing that both sides seem to be pretty dug in their positions, which obviously differ enough that they haven't been able to come up with a deal. So again, I'm not anticipating seeing Saquon Barkley. He's not required to be there, based on the fact he doesn't have a contract. The Giants can't fine him for not showing up according to the rules as we understand them. So once again, it'll pretty much be status quo. The Giants will be look like they'll be going forward and practicing for those 2 days without the star running back. I wanted to talk briefly just about a couple of things that we might look for, a couple of things that we might see during the mini camp. The rules for these mandatory mini camp sessions are exactly the same as they are for phase 3 of the OTAs. Reporters had access to a couple of those. One last week was canceled due to the air quality. So we've only seen 2 Giants practices. At least the media has only seen 2 of these off-season practices. These are non-contact practices with no pads. 11 on 11 is allowed, but but you don't see real blocking. You don't see real contact, even if there are 11 on 11 sessions in the workouts that we've seen. The Giants have limited themselves to 7 on 7 when sessions have been competitive, and I would expect that to continue this week during the mandatory minicamp. Brian Daboll has placed a really, really high premium on making sure that players get to training camp healthy. He's called the OTAs basically a learning and teaching camp. I would assume that the Giants are going to approach these two mandatory minicamp practices in the same way. I will be surprised, albeit pleasantly surprised from a selfish standpoint in terms of what we might be able to see and learn. I will be very surprised if we see any 11 on 11 during the two practices that we're going to see this week. That means, of course, that we'll be limited to individual drills. We'll be limited to watching special teams drills. We'll be limited to watching 7 on 7, which means that we'll be watching a glorified passing camp. We'll get to look at some of the receivers. We'll get to look at some of the tight ends. We'll get maybe a little bit of an idea on chemistry developing between Daniel Jones and Darren Waller, Paris Campbell, Jalen Hyatt, and some of his newer targets. We might get a decent look at Deonte Banks, Trey Hawkins, the 6th-round pick, and get a decent look at what we might see in training camp in terms of the secondary and in terms of the competition for spots at what is a very, very deep and competitive Giants wide receiver room, but we're not going to get a look at offensive line play. This is just not the time of year for that. And I don't think we're really going to get a full look at undrafted free agents to the point where we're going to be able to come out of mandatory minicamp and say, this player has really put himself in position to have a good shot at making the roster. I just don't think that these particular practices, if they're structured the way the OTA practices were structured, they're just not going to be enough to give us information on linebackers, on offensive and defensive linemen. We might, as I said, we'll have some information on the cornerbacks. We'll have some information on tight ends and wide receivers, but we're not really going to get a full look at guys playing other positions. So that'll come in training camp. If you're looking for some information on undrafted free agents, did a podcast the other day with Emery Hunt of Football Game Plan. You can check that out. You can check out the story we did at bigblueview.com. You can also check out my interview with West Virginia coach Neil Brown, who spoke to us at length about former Mountaineer wide receiver Bryce Ford Wheaton, who's trying to make the Giants roster as an undrafted free agent. You can look at my story on Big Blue View, or as with my interview with Emery Hunt, you can check that out on the podcast as well, wherever you listen to podcasts. Brown was terrific, gave us quite a bit of insight into Ford Wheaton's background, into his development as a player, and into the kind of NFL player that Brown thinks Ford Wheaton can turn into. All right, I thought what I would do quickly is give you some notes on rookies. Obviously, Deonte Banks, 1st-round pick. The Giants are hopeful that Banks will develop into a starting cornerback in 2023. And Wink Martindale said the other day he's been very impressed thus far by Banks' approach to his job. He's impressed by his athleticism, by his attitude, by his work ethic. So very, very high on Deonte Banks, and hopefully he will be the kind of player that the Giants anticipated. John Michael Schmitz has been working as the starting center, and I really don't see that changing. It'll be interesting to see, how quickly Schmitz really comes into his own and really takes charge of the offensive line. A couple of years back, we saw Creed Humphrey really play well as a rookie center. Tyler Linderbaum played well for the Ravens a year ago. Hopefully, the Giants get that kind of play from John Michael Schmitz as they continue to try to develop their offensive line. Offensive coordinator Mike Kafka said the other day that third round pick Jalen Hyatt is right on schedule in terms of his development. To be honest, in the couple of practices that I saw, we didn't see a whole lot from Hyatt. The ball didn't come his way a whole lot. I think that he's a guy who the Giants are probably going to develop. I'm not anticipating great numbers from Jalen Hyatt in terms of receptions, at least at the beginning of the season. The Giants, if they're healthy, they have a lot of options at the receiver position. Isaiah Hodgins, Darius Slayton, Paris Campbell, Wan'Dale Robinson if he's healthy, Colin Johnson, Sterling Shepard if he makes it back. So there is no need for the Giants to rush Jalen Hyatt. There's no need for them to force him into the lineup until he's ready. They'll take advantage of his speed in ways whenever they can, but I'm guessing that it's going to be a little bit of a slow burn with Jalen Hyatt in terms of his development, at least at the beginning of the 2023 season. All right, Giants fans, that's just a quick update on the beginning of mandatory minicamp on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Training camp, of course, will start at the end of July, and Big Blue View will be on hand for a good portion of that as well. So please, stick with Big Blue View throughout the summer as we continue to give you as much information on the Giants as we can, keep you entertained and informed with our summer school series and with our growing Big Blue View glossary of terms as we help you try to understand some of the things that you see during NFL games and that you read and hear as you listen to commentators or read our stuff at Big Blue View or anywhere else that you consume NFL information. All right, Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there, take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.